The following is my conversation with Joshua Riddle. Joshua is a fellow American expat and someone with a unique vantage point on where mountain bike hardware is heading. He's the marketing director for Hayes Bicycle Group, whose brands include Hayes Brakes, Manitou Suspension, and Reynolds Wheels, which means he's not just watching the 32-inch wheel conversation from the sidelines, he's in the middle of it. In the episode, we dig into the question that's dividing the mountain bike world right now. Is 32 a genuine physics-backed leap forward? Or is it the industry's latest attempt to shake loose some upgrade dollars from your wallet? We talk about what separates real innovations from fads, the disc brakes, dropper posts, fat bikes, gravel, and what the 29er transition can teach us about what's coming. We also get into the very real business challenges this poses for mid-sized brands, the chicken and egg problem facing component manufacturers, and why Joshua thinks this question isn't if 32 is coming, it's how. This is the Business of Cycling podcast. Joshua Riddle, thanks for coming on again. Great to see you.
No worries. Happy to be here.
Fellow American in Europe, in Italy.
We got the expat team back together.
That's right. I can't call you a Yankee, though. I called someone a Yankee the other day, and he got a little offended. He's like, I'm not a Yankee. I was like, okay.
Is he from south of the Mason-Dixon?
I don't know where he's from, but I was just a little taken aback, and he kind of looked at me. I was like, wow, okay. I won't. That used to just kind of be my catch-all for, referring to other Americans that I would run into, just because, it seemed a little innocent, but I guess it was.
Well, all Italians refer to you as Yankee, and then depending on the conversation, I try to educate them on how it only applies to a certain portion of the states.
Right. Well, you're from North Carolina, so you're not a Yankee.
Well, then I also have to get into the part about North Carolina. Oh, so you're from up north. I was like, no, it's kind of like saying North Calabria.
Or North exactly. North Lazio.
There you go.
All right. So I love catching up with you. We had talked about getting a conversation going about some kind of current events, and so what we've kind of landed on was the 32-inch wheel discussion, and this kind of came about as, okay, is this a fad? Is this going to be something that stays? And you work with a component brand. You work with the Hayes has wheels, brakes, with Reynolds as well, suspension. And so you kind of see this, and so you've got a unique viewpoint on kind of what that means. And so that was where I wanted to jump in. It's like, okay, something new comes out. Some of them go along, some of them get adopted, and then some of them just kind of, remain where they were or die on the vine, if you even want to say that. So, from this lens, what are you seeing so far with this discussion of the 32-inch wheel? Give us what you're seeing.
Well, I mean, as you put down that there's been multiple mountain bike innovations, 29ers, disc brakes, fat bikes, 13 speed. And you asked me in an earlier conversation whether or not there was a reliable pattern for what sticks and what ends up getting shelved. And I thought about it a little bit, and I think actually it just comes down to whether or not you can give a tangible, interpretable, decipherable advantage to the end consumer. And if and when that exists, then I think something sticks around. If not, then I think it'll see it go by the wayside. And I try to rack my brain around some of the ones that maybe didn't stick. Let's talk about oval chain rings, for example. And we've seen them come and go. Yeah. I got the third repetition of that cycling industry equivalent of the bell bottoms.
Fat bikes came, popped, and then sort of kind of settled into what the real demand was, it seems like to me.
Well, I think fat bikes came and they never left, but they stayed where they were applicable. Right. So where they do produce a tangible and evident benefit to the end consumers.
Snowy conditions.
Yeah, it's centered around geographic locations that have the conditions. It excels in snow and sand. And if you don't live in one of the two of those areas, then you don't really have much use for a fat bike in Manhattan. So,
but gravel feels like gravel has a very strong use case, especially like in rural communities. And for people that are maybe afraid of riding on road, and they like drop bar, and they like the road feel, but they don't want to be on with traffic, maybe that they feel a little more comfortable on, rural type roads or in the woods, I guess.
Yeah, so you take that and add to the fact that it's also basically with a caveat, the Swiss Army knife equivalent to the bicycle, except that Swiss Army knife, I hope we don't get sued by Swiss Army or Victorinox, but it does everything, but it does all poorly. But the gravel bike does, you can use it to do a bit of everything. If you have to own one bike and have it in the garage, the gravel bike is the one. You can swap out the wheels or the tires and you've got a
Yeah.
road essentially, or a cross bike. And then, to further the point we mentioned earlier about fat bikes being centered around certain geographic locations, well, the gravel bike applies to pretty much everyone across the globe. Even if you're living in the center of Manhattan, just to use the same example again,
You can still use it. Yeah.
you can still use it, and you get across the bridge, and you're into New Jersey, into the woods if you need to be.
Right. So from that lens, is there are you seeing a tangible use case for 32-inch wheels?
Well, it's all still in theory now. So just to kind of finalize the issue around, is there a reliable pattern for what sticks? It has to have a tangible and uniformly applicable innovation, or has to represent that. It's got to represent value and benefit for the riders. And it has to represent eventually zero compromise. So disc brakes at the beginning, that's why I say eventually it has to represent this. At the very beginning, disc brakes,
Yeah, disc
even
brakes.
on road bikes, represented the addition of almost a kilo of weight. And people weren't keen on that, but they were like, okay, I can see the benefit of these disc brakes to the point where I can accept the compromise of additional weight in a community that was, counting the single grams of
Right.
bikes. And I remember way back when Trek launched the what is it, vapor coat, and you're paying like $800 more to have a thinner coat of paint just to drop the weight 80 grams. And so to go from there to add a kilo of weight to the whole bike with disc brakes, you had to deny 10 years of everything was centered on dropping a couple grams to what, you're going to win races because you brake better. But eventually you get that new innovation, and then technology follows suit, and now the sub 7 kilo disc brake road bike is well, I won't say omnipresent, but it's not something reserved for only the weight weenie forums.
Right.
Yeah, another one would be full suspension mountain bike and dropper posts. There was
Yeah.
the weight weenie approach as well. Yeah, if you can recall, cross country riders were 6-bolt rotors on wheels, and they were taking off 3 bolts just to save 10 grams. And you go from that to people. Now it's commonplace that all cross country bikes basically are full suspension. I won't say the death of the hardtail, but we'd say, let's say 80-20. Full suspension
Sure.
and post is a non-negotiable. It has to be there. Well, that undeniably adds some weight, but people are seeing value in that performance enhancement to the point you even see dropper post on the Milano Sanremo, which is funny. But so those all showed those benefits, and they stuck around.
Can you give people an overview of the 29er of evolution, just from what, like, I guess I don't, like, in your view, what is we'll call it distribution of 29er wheels in mountain biking now? Is it like more than 50%?
Oh yeah, for sure. We'll say it's
The
hard.
standard.
Standard, no, when you talk about standards in mountain bike, then people get a little itchy. But yeah, it's the most common size. Cross country for sure is all 29. Trail probably mostly, it will say 90-95% 29er. And then when you start getting into the gravity segments, enduro and downhill, you creep in and see some mullet.
What is
So
that?
29 front, 27.5 rear.
Oh, okay.
But by and large, front wheels are all 29. You start to see 27.5 rear wheels when you get into the gravity segment.
And then why did that happen? That happened because of, like, what were the advantages of 29, and are those the same advantages we're seeing with 32?
Well, that's just it. It's, you've got a larger diameter. I think the whole 32 thing, it's not the first time we've seen it. So you'd be right to draw the parallel between, the jump from 26 to 29. And now we're seeing the second episode of that, if you will, with
Right.
29 to 32. And it's basically, it's rooted in physics, not fashion. Although I think the cynics can make the argument that it's a unfortunate convergence of event that the industry is, kind of hitting on tough times, overflow of stock, and so on and so forth. And the cynical take could be that, you're just inventing something to obligate people to buy more bikes, or to swap over a bike because of this new technology. However, the logic can stand on its own 2 feet insofar as this jump from 26 to 29 is the same thing that 29 to 32. You've got better rollover capacity, potentially higher speeds. There's some negative elements to it, but you've got a bigger contact patch when you go from 26 to 29. The same thing is true when you go from 29 to 32. So I think there's plenty of arguments based in physics that support the move to 32. However, I think the math will draw a parallel to, not really draw a parallel. The math doesn't math for certain sizes of individuals. So I think what we're getting into is that 32 is going to represent an advantage, but it gets to a point to where God only made me 1 meter 65 or 5'6" for American listeners. The proportion of a 32-inch wheel sat next to me and one sat next to you is totally different. And the geometry is going to work different. However, I think 32 is the onset that represents turning the very last constant on a bicycle into a variable. Up until now, you could adjust pretty much everything on a bike, from the frame's geometry to the stem to the setback of the seat post to the crank arm length. You could even, some brands were even doing, they made available different Q factors for pedals, for example. You could adjust your cleats, you could determine your own tire dimensions and so on and so forth. But I guess this is more on the road side. It was always predicated on having the 700cc tire, or wheel rather. And if you stop and look at, some of the extra large frames, when you get to a head tube that's longer than the fork legs, well, you can't say that geometry is going to ride as it should have. And
Right.
that was, if you were going to design everything from ground up, there was no standard in the industry that was the size wheel that you would have put underneath that bike. So I think it will produce some very valid advantages from a geometry standpoint, from a handling standpoint, and so on and so forth, from a certain size bike up. And then for somebody, this is my own personal take, for somebody my height or lack thereof, maybe I'm already seeing the benefits of the 32, but only in a 29. Because for me, probably 29 is the upper limit of what's going to be feasible for the geometry for somebody my height. Lest you're either going to have a really long or really open head tube angle, or you're going to be talking about not toe overlap, but ankle overlap at 32.
And so at this point, then it comes down to who's going to risk, because I know like when these things happen, it's like it's like an investment, and it's like, okay, are the fork manufacturer going to start risking, or because this is all investment, you have to invest in these new products, you have to develop them, you have to bring them in, you have to produce them, which is all money that you're, tying up in the inventory. So I suppose, I've spoken with the founder of 20 of Niner bikes, and
Mm-hmm.
Chris Sugai, and he said it. He's like, we bet on this. We had to like beg these fork manufacturers to give us, forks that would fit these wheels. And so it's going to come down to, I suppose, what we'll probably see in the next few months and years is the adoption will just kind of, we'll see if the adoption happens and who's gonna take that step, and then typically the first movers are the ones that kind of get the biggest chunk, I presume.
Well, for sure. I think there is some small differences because in Chris's experience back then, it was, Gary Fisher was probably one of the first on 29, the early adopter, or the early innovator, if you will. And then, Chris, who got doubled down, and there were a handful of people that were ushering in 29. I think you're going to see something different here with 32, whereas from all of my intel, it's coming, and it'll be coming in a relatively big way. What I think
Really, it
the
sounds like from what you're hearing on the ground, it's something that's going to will likely stick, is what you're hearing.
Yeah, it's going to be here. It's coming. I think what the question mark is still around just how it comes. And I think I alluded to it earlier. Is it going to be, 32 down to size medium, and then below size medium, you'll have still 29 because of the geometry constraints I mentioned earlier?
Hmm.
or are they going to find a way to make 32 fit across the board? It would be, one challenge. And there's a lot of challenges in there from a manufacturing standpoint of having two different standards
Yeah.
on one model.
Yep.
You got to, inventory becomes a complication because then you got to have two different types of forks, two different styles of wheels, and so on and so forth.
So the products that would be impacted would be the fork, well, the frame, the fork, the wheels, the
You got to have
tires, of
different
course.
tires. You got to
Yeah.
have, you got to go back to the drawing board on the wheels.
Yeah.
You have to go back to the drawing
Fork.
board and the fork, the frame. But then at the same time, none of those are developed in a vacuum. That's why you will have seen probably some leaks of prototypes that we're collaborating with OEs to kind of to have a starting position to determine what are the needs. Because until you write it, it's a chicken or the egg,
Right.
and who takes it? Who kicked it off for one? Nobody can really say. And then who determines what the right solution is? And they have to be done as in a collaborative fashion. One example, you'll have seen our prototype fork already out underneath Sour Bikes. I think they just got released on a GMBN special and plenty of other articles as well. But one thing you find is that to have a stack that's so much higher, head tubes shrink, and then you've got to consider, well, you know what? The steer tube of the fork, it's not done tapering by the time you're getting to the top of the head tubes oftentimes. And that's something that you didn't really think about when you started or your first foray into this new dimension.
Right.
What is the correct hub width? And it seems like there's a bit of a convergence to not change those, and hopefully they don't. But if it gets wider, if it stays where it's at, how do you counteract the deflection of the wheel? Are there issues with that fork and the caliper potentially touching spokes? You're adding weight to the external part of the wheel because it's a bigger wheel, so more weight, slightly heavier tire. Yeah, there's tons of things to take into consideration.
But what happens is I think it's sort of a tipping point, right? Where you kind of cross the chasm, I guess is what they call it, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
if you're able to cross the chasm and you get that tipping point and people realize, okay, people like this because I mean, we're not going to hide the fact that brands like not only cycling but all economic activity, is sort of dependent on innovation to grow, right? If your bike is perfect, you're not going to buy another one. And so this is sort of kind of what we're dancing around. It's like, well, okay, is this an actual innovation or is this just a way for someone to trade up? And people are happy to trade up, like sometimes people are absolutely happy to buy something new, to
But
kind of
look at
change.
every single innovation that's come about in the last 5 to 10 years.
Right.
Every time something comes up, then go into the comment section and it's 80% cynics talking about,
Right.
sure, why would I go from 10 speed to 11 speed? You don't need an extra gear. I'm doing just fine with this gear. Or, people from rim brake to disc brake, and it was full of cynics there. And from 26 to 29, the same thing. And
The ra-
sometimes right, but it's undeniable. Just look at the light years of evolution in the clothing space. I think listening to a couple of your other podcasts that emerged a couple of times, just the distance. If you look at a piece of kit from now and you look at a piece of kit from 5 years ago, just how different it is, or 10 years ago. Well, those are all done by these really small incremental improvements to a point where it's almost unrecognizable from the products you get today than 10 years ago. But every
Yep.
one of those small increments, you have the cynics saying, whatever.
Yeah, like it makes me think of the razor with five blades. It's like, do I really
Yeah, what
need
do you
five blades?
want?
I have a five blade razor. I love it. So,
Right. No, for sure. And I think that's just it. Incremental improvements, and I don't know, the metaphor of the boiling the frog 1 degree at a time, but in a positive sense. Yeah, we've made this small incremental improvement one bit at a time. Aerodynamics on frames, probably unperceivable, the step from the 2016 bike to the 2018 bike. But if you look at a 2016 bike and a 2026 bike, light years of difference.
so where do you think, Joshua, we're going to see kind of the canary in the coal mine here? Is it if Trek and Specialized jump in?
Canary in the coal mine in what sense? What is the tipping point of us going to 32?
Yeah, like what do you think is going to be the point where we say, okay, like this is a real thing? Because right now it still feels very niche. and I guess we'll go through this season. We'll see what happens. But what should we be watching? What should we be watching out for to see whether or not it's going one way or the other, in your opinion?
I think, as oftentimes is the case, professional athletes kind of
Competition.
lead the way a lot of times. And I think what will happen in this year's professional season in terms of cross country will tell you a little bit.
Sure.
And so I would imagine at some point during the season you'll see somebody. We even saw last year, I think, what was on the BMC bike. There was an Allen's fork that was 32, and they had some special stems made to adjust or account for the differences in geometry and so on and so forth. So this will be a year, I think, of people working through some of the questions that they have of how do they incorporate this technology. And then as more and more components come to light and are available, like right now, to go out and find a tire is really difficult.
Sure.
There are tons of rideable samples of anything. So I get back to that chicken and the egg conversation. You know, the frame manufacturers can't dial in their perfect geometry for the solution just yet because they don't have a cornucopia of, we'll say, evolved and rideable samples of wheels, suspension, tires. And it's I think you'll see this being the year where everybody's testing. You're probably going to see a good bit of spy shots here and there. But yeah, to address your question, I would imagine, the professional athletes will be kind of the earliest adopters that can afford to actually test on something like that. And then once you see that, then that validation will probably trickle down.
And it'll sort of be like however many riders in the field are going to have it, and then from there probably look at assortments on the team on the websites, bikes, tires. So yeah, will be interesting to see how things play out. Typically, this stuff is again like 18 months out. So you being in the industry, it sounds like you're positive on this topic, and you're probably seeing some things a little bit farther ahead of the curve. So I think that tells us something as well. So I guess when it comes down to like if you're a mid-sized brand, like this is where things get a little bit difficult for brands. It's like you maybe have, financially you have obligations, you have cash flow that's available for ordering, for a brand like Trek or Specialized or Giant, like they can dabble in this and see if it works or not. But if you're a mid-sized brand and someone's kind of like, hey, we need to do this, what is the business case? Like if you can talk to these brands that are like, like the mid-tier brands, like what are you gonna like? What are the considerations? What are the thought processes that they need to be going through with around this, in your opinion?
It was never a great time to change because you streamline your operations and you predicate that on infinite reproducibility, if you will, and you find efficiencies there. So anytime you have to do a change, it's going to disrupt efficiencies. But
Warehouse, everything.
Mhm. But then you've got to weigh in, the opportunity costs or benefits of maybe jumping in and being a bit of a first mover in what is a new segment. I mean, it shakes up the hierarchy at a certain point. You play to your strengths. If you're smaller and a little bit more agile, maybe you can jump out and get some notoriety for yourself. I
I
think
worked
that,
for I worked for a brand. Sorry to I worked for a brand, and they prided themselves on doing sort of strange things.
Mhm.
And this is going to sound a little cheeky, but it's like if you're in like some sort of niche area, it's like they can't compare you to anyone else. So
Right.
that's a little off topic, but if you're doing things that are unique, you can kind of play in your own space. But I think we've already crossed that chasm here with the 32.
It would seem like it, but
Yeah,
I think there's a bit of a conundrum, and I always mention that you should play to your strengths. And the large company I kind of equate with the battleship or the aircraft carrier, and
sure.
the really large player. It moves a lot of weight and has a lot of firepower, but it takes it 2 kilometers to turn around. Whereas the motorboat has a lot less firepower, but it can be a lot more agile, although it packs a lot less firepower. The more you can be agile and switch up and change and kind of be amongst that first wave, you gain more notoriety. That's how you can become competitive
Visibility, yeah. And so you're
and grab
saying that for
those
mid-tier,
crumbs off the bottom end. The problem is that sometimes to be cutting edge and innovative takes a little bit of investment that maybe the big guys have. So potentially it evens out in the end, but if those are the cards you've got, then you've got to play those. You're the smaller guy, you got to be quick. So the early adopters meet the innovators and vice versa. So I think there's opportunity there, but it's not without risk for sure. I
sure.
think this is a calculated risk. It's about timing. I think the question isn't about if, because 32 is coming. It's about how is it going to come? Is it going to be 32, as we alluded to earlier? Is it going to be across the range? Is it going to be size specific? I guess maybe the smaller builders offering custom, custom builds, custom geometries, and so on and so forth. They stand to benefit because they're making their frames one at a time. And so there's really no cost to change for them. They can weld it up 32 or they can, weld it up 29, if you will.
Well, and
And
one other thing that we're not talking about specifically, but we're also kind of saying is we're not only talking about the bike manufacturers, we're talking about the tire manufacturers, the fork manufacturers, like the inner tubes, like these are all part of this chasm that like, okay, so who's going to move first? Who's going to put it in? Who's going to develop these products first? For this ecosystem, and you, as you said, like the tires right now are a little tough to find. I presume the forks are a little bit tough to find as well. Is that what you're seeing?
Well, we've got one of the only rideable samples that are out there, as evidenced by the media that's come about recently with Manitou forks underneath
Manitou.
bikes.
Okay.
With Manitou, I think there's certainly risk involved at any level, but for component manufacturers, and I represent one of those, actually two of those directly involved in the 32, so suspension and wheels.
So Reynolds and
Reynolds and
Manitou are jumping in. It sounds like not jumping in, but are easing in.
Easing in. Well, we've started our baseline upon which we're going to have this collaborative development with our OE manufacturers, because you can't develop a fork on its own. It's got to play nice. Sure. It's a symphony at the end of the day, right? And that symphony.
Wow, it's a symphony. You threw that one in there.
I did. It is a symphony, and it has to play on the same music sheet, and right. To do so requires some collaboration and communication between the two.
So you're really at the
slightly less risk from the component manufacturer side, because Manitou, for example, we offer forks from 20-inch to 24 to 26 to 27.5 to fat bike to dirt jump to 29, and then now eventually we'll have 32 for all that, or for many applications. And in doing so, obviously there's some risk, because you've got to produce that. You have to have the molds, you have to have the production, the castings, and so on and so forth. But it's not as risky as an OE producing complete bikes predicated on that specific
platform.
Platform.
But yeah, no, thanks for coming on. This was fun, kind of diving into this for sure. What if people, I know this is what we usually do at the end. I know you've probably done this before, but we're going to do it again. If people want to reach you, Joshua, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me at Joshua_Thomas_Riddle on Instagram, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Joshua Thomas Riddle.
Okay, man. Well, thanks for coming on. It was great hearing from you again.
No worries. Yeah, I enjoy it every time. It's always a good one.
All right, man. We'll see you around.
Ciao.